How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is PSReady, my channel all about PlayStation. We only had 2 videos last week because for the third video, instead of uploading the video I made, I accidentally uploaded raw footage. I use this app called Timebolt where you put in the whole A-roll. So like one long video clip, you export it, put it in there, and it cuts out all the like air between voice clips. And so it was that. It was technically like A-roll cut, but there was a lot of double takes. There was like all this extra crap in there. So yeah, you could see how long my recordings are versus how long the video actually ends up. I'm honestly shocked how many people watched it though, like thousands of views on just unedited footage. So maybe I'll upload some raw videos in the future. Anyway, in today's video, we are doing the rare single topic video because over the weekend, some big stuff came out, not only about the PS6, but about something else that Sony is working on, and I'm really excited to talk about it. So this is coming from renowned leaker Kepler L2. I've talked about this guy's stuff multiple times here on the channel, and the track record, as far as I'm concerned, is as close to perfect as you can get. So he took to the forums over on NeoGAF, which is a terrible place that you should definitely stay away from, and he talked about some extra details on all the leaks and stuff surrounding the chip that Sony is working on for the PlayStation 6. I'm not going to cover the whole thing, but essentially there was a bidding war between Intel and AMD, and Intel came to play. They brought over executives, they brought over engineers, they said, look, we want that consistent revenue from you buying chips from us, Sony. We are going to make sure that games are backwards compatible. Let's do it. But we want a lot of money. AMD came to play too and said, we'll just make a chip that runs all the games that like our old chips could run, and we'll charge you a lot less for it. And we've been making all your other chips. So Sony went with them in the end. And what Kepler revealed is even more interesting to me because Sony, according to him, is working on 2 SoCs for the PlayStation 6 generation. And if you don't know what an SoC is, it's system on a chip. So like in a PC, the GPU, the CPU, the RAM, and everything else are all separate, and the CPU and GPU are all on one chip when it comes to a home console like the PS4, PS5, and eventually the PS6. So it's like how they fit everything into a much smaller package than a desktop PC. It's also why they're underclocked compared to a PC, because you're putting everything into a little teeny chip. So when it comes to the PS4, PS5, PS3, PS2, PS1, they only had one SoC at a time. And when you have stuff like the PSP and Vita, those were dedicated SoCs. And when you're talking about adding Pro consoles into the mix, like the PS4 Pro and PS5 Pro, they don't make those at the same time. They make the PS5 chip, get the PS5 out the door, then immediately start development on the PS5 Pro chip because it's just like a better version of the current chip. So this time around, they're working on 2 separate models right out the gate. And of course, we all know what I'm thinking here, and it's probably right. This second chip is most likely what's going to power the PSP3. And this is extremely exciting because it's like really outside of the leaks and stuff that we've heard from people like Moore's Law is Dead and other sites like Insider Gaming, X, Y, and Z. It's really the first concrete details we're getting about them really actually committing to making a handheld for the next generation. And it just makes a lot of sense, and we're going to go into why right now. So the first huge thing to cover is where the handheld market is now versus where it was at going into like the PS4 generation. Back then, they were coming off of the massive failure of the Vita. Like that thing did not sell well at all. They did some cool first party games like Uncharted Golden Abyss and Killzone Mercenary. I don't think they supported it enough, but they really tried for the first couple of years of the Vita. They also lived through the generation of the Wii U bombing completely hard. Like that thing bombed harder than the Vita. So if they were reading the tea leaves, which I think they accurately did, I don't like blame them for kind of saying, well, it doesn't seem like people really care all that much about handhelds right now outside of something like the 3DS, which is at a price point that we could never reach with what we're chasing, which is console quality graphics on the go. Fast forward a little bit and the handheld market absolutely explodes. The Nintendo Switch comes out, dominates the market, sells hundreds and hundreds of millions of units. There's tons of games. And what Nintendo smartly did is they eliminated the like 2 system market that they had, where they had a home console, which was the Wii U and the Wii and the GameCube and everything like that. And then they also had a handheld market, which was the Game Boy, the Nintendo DS, and the 3DS. They merged it together and they took the games that would have been relegated to the handheld market, they beefed them up a little bit and released them on the Switch, and then they took all the home console games that they would have released on the Wii, Wii U, and GameCube and also released those on the Switch, which resulted in more games, which is great, of course, because getting more games is awesome, and it also resulted in more people buying games because you have your entire audience on one platform instead of splitting the difference between two different platforms. Then later on, Valve enters the handheld market with the Steam Deck, and when you compare that to like even the Vita, which sold terribly, I think the Steam Deck is not selling anywhere near those numbers, but it's selling really well for what it is. Valve sells it at a loss, you know, they get it down to that $399 price point because they own the storefront that you use when you're on the Steam Deck. They own Steam, and when you're selling the console at a loss, you make that up very quickly with people buying tons and tons of games on Steam, because if it's a Valve game, the very few of them that there are, if you buy that game, they get 100% of the revenue. But if you buy a game from a third party like PlayStation, Activision, anyone else across the board, they of course get 30% of every sale. So while they don't make the profit on the actual console, they make it back really quickly as people start building out their Steam library with all the various sales that Steam runs throughout the year. So while the Steam Deck isn't as successful as something like the Nintendo Switch, it doesn't need to be. It's just a good way to keep people gaming on your market when they're not on their home gaming PC. It gives them a way to just stay in that Steam ecosystem and continues the drive for engagement, and it drives it very high because over the weekend, Steam, for like the third or fourth time this year, hit its highest concurrent peak for like the third or fourth time this year at like 38 or 39 million people all playing on Steam at the same time. I'm pretty sure that's because of Black Myth Wukong, like they brought in that China market, which is just billions of people who are ready to play games but haven't had a big linchpin game like that. And now they have one with Black Myth Wukong, which is getting a lot more people on Steam. Helldivers 2 got a great update that has consistently boosted the player base. Space Marine 2 is doing amazing. Like the PC ecosystem is doing a lot better now than it was at the beginning of the PS5 generation. I think that's just a cold hard fact. So Sony's been sitting back this entire time, and I honestly think that was a really smart move because they are absolutely primed at this point to have a handheld launch with the next generation console that could really be the handheld we've always dreamed of, which is a handheld that runs everything. So the really cool thing about this is that they're not using PS5 tech for it. They're developing an entirely new SoC. Up until now, my assumption was that they would just take the chip from either the PS5 or PS5 Pro, downclock it and say, hey, you can play PS4 games on this thing, you can play PS5 games, you can download PS1 and 2 games and PSP games, you can play all of that on this handheld, and then they would also take the streaming tech that's inside the PlayStation Portal, port that over to this eventual handheld and say for PS6 games, you're going to be able to stream them from your home console. So you would still buy games for the PlayStation 6 that are natively made for that console, and then if you wanted to play them on this handheld, you would just stream them from your console, and it wouldn't be the best experience, but it would be another selling point to keep people engaged in that PS ecosystem. But this time around, knowing that the chip is being developed in tandem between this handheld and the PS6 chip, that leads me to believe that their goal for this thing is for it to cover all generations of PlayStation except 3, because they'll never emulate PS3 games for some reason. So when this thing comes out, it'll be an extra thing that aids the whole ecosystem of the PlayStation 6. I mean, that's just the path they've been going down this generation, right? Like everything is built around the PS5. You've got the home console, then you've got things like the DualSense Edge, which is a big high-priced controller for the PS5. Then you've got things like the Pulse headset, the Pulse Elite headset, the Pulse Explorer headset. All of those are made to work perfectly with the PlayStation 5. Then you've got the PSVR 2, it's an attachment for the PlayStation 5. So with the PS6 generation, if they have this handheld basically be a portable PS6, it gives them even more opportunity to open up the ecosystem wider, because it'll probably be cheaper than a PS6. So then you're capturing younger people or people who are not necessarily willing to spend $600 or $700 on a PS6, because we're seeing the prices increase so much lately. And that's kind of like the best thing about where handheld gaming is at this point. Back in the day, you would get spin-off games from series like Resistance, you know, or Ratchet and Clank or Jak and Daxter that reused assets from the latest PS2 game like Ratchet and Clank Size Matters or the Daxter game or Secret Agent Clank. You wouldn't get fully, you know, ported over console games. Even when you had a game that shipped on everything like Star Wars Battlefront 2, for example, the PSP version was always different. It was its own game that wasn't on par with what you would get on the PS2. But where things are at now, thanks to companies like Nintendo and Valve, the handhelds are being built to run the exact same game. So you'll have your entire library. You won't be forced to buy separate games for 40 or 50 bucks, and you'll just be able to take advantage of the stuff that you're spending $70 on your home console, which I think is amazing. And I also think it's amazing that we're getting signs that this thing is going to be built to run PS6 games. games, or at the very least cross-gen PS6 games, because if the selling point of a handheld is, yeah, it's going to play PS5 games and PS4 games, the selling point there is like you buy this accessory to play games again that you've already played. But if you open it up to the PS6 and new games, especially cross-gen games that are going to come out during the beginning of the generation, or hopefully not last as long as they did this generation, you're selling it on the dream of playing new games, which I think is the most important thing. Because with the Steam Deck, where we're at right now with that thing is it's basically the perfect device if you want to emulate games from your childhood, so like the PS2 and Nintendo 64 and DS era, and it's really good for games that came out during the PS4 generation. But when it comes to new games, you never really want to buy a game day one for the Steam Deck because you don't know how it's going to run. So you got to wait for these channels to upload videos showing you performance at different settings and everything like that. But if it's a console manufacturer who's putting a mandate in place that you need to make sure your game runs on this handheld, you're not going to have to worry about that. I mean, it's still going to be a good move to wait for Digital Foundry to put out a video that compares the handheld version and the console version, because you don't want to get a totally dumbed down experience. But I think the idea of selling brand new games for this thing is super important because it makes people like me want it more. I'm kind of getting sick of this thing where I have a great handheld that's only good enough to run old games, and then I have to wait for every single new game to have a YouTube video that shows me how it's going to run, so I don't waste my $50, $60, $70 buying a brand new game. And on PC, it's a total crapshoot regardless. Even with my super powerful 4090 PC, I still have to wait for YouTube videos to find out if the game is finished. Final Fantasy 16 just came to PC. You can't get 60 FPS running that game 4K native on a 4090 desktop. So I didn't buy that game. I was like, I have a laptop. It's a 4090 laptop. If you can't run it 4K native on a desktop with the 4090, I don't even want to deal with the tech support problems that I'm going to have to deal with running that game on PC. So that's a great counter to things like the Steam Deck, and it's a great counter to things like Nintendo, because we all know they're chasing a cheaper market, which means less powerful hardware. So you're kind of competing in the same realm. And if we're getting as many third-party games on this eventual Nintendo Switch 2, I think you'll just go with the PlayStation handheld over that any day of the week, because it'll get much better performance than the Nintendo Switch, you know? And when it comes to Xbox, it's not even a competition this generation. We just got new numbers, and the Xbox Series consoles are not outselling the Xbox One, and they're being outsold by the PS5 by like 2-1, which is insane. So Xbox, instead of making a Pro Xbox Series X or making a handheld that goes with that generation, they're cutting their losses, and they're allegedly releasing a follow-up to the Series X in 2026. But instead of having a Series S, which is a downclocked home console that causes a lot of problems for game development, they're going to have a handheld as well. And I think that thing really does pose some competition to Sony in terms of the handheld realm, not the home console realm. Obviously, I think that's like an uphill losing battle no matter what at this point. But when it comes to a handheld, they kind of beat their biggest problem, which is that people spent the Nintendo Switch and PS4 generation building up massive libraries of digital games. So when it comes to a home console, you're really never going to switch sides, because you're always going to have that thought in the back of your mind that you built up a huge library of free PS Plus games. You bought a lot of digital games, because we know, even though people like us buy a lot of physical games, most people, like 3/4 of them at least, buy their games all digital. They're not going to want to switch sides and buy an Xbox because they'd be starting from scratch. But now with Game Pass, you don't need to do that. You don't need to build up a library, because if you just pay them $29 a month or whatever, you have de facto the entire Xbox library. And while this generation, they've been really light on first party stuff outside of things like Flight Simulator and Forza Horizon 5, there's really nothing else that they've done great this generation. They have some good stuff on the horizon, like Horizon 6, like Fable, like Gears E-Day. Like, there is some cool stuff that I am excited for coming down the pipe. And if you want to get people to subscribe to your Game Pass service, give them the ability to play it on the go with a handheld. Like, I could see if that thing comes out before the Sony handheld, people buying that handheld just to be a little Game Pass machine that can play their PC games, because it's allegedly going to run a Windows-like operating system that'll allow you to use Steam. So you'll build up your PC library on the side as well. So knowing that the big metric that everyone is chasing this generation and going forward is engagement, they want to keep as many people playing on their platform as possible with as little distraction to other platforms as possible. I think Sony is being strong-armed in a good way into making a handheld, and they're just really well set up to succeed with it, honestly. Like, I was trying to think of a smart way to say that, but they're really well set up to succeed with this thing because it's going to play the games that you've been building up for 2 generations at this point, and it'll be 3 generations by the time this PS6/handheld comes out. So it's just rewarding people for being diehard PlayStation fans, which is something they haven't done in a very long time. But it's not an absolute slam dunk for Sony, even with the huge libraries that people have built up, even with it being a PS6 handheld. I think they really need to look at their past and learn from their mistakes. If this thing uses proprietary memory and does not have USB-C, it's dead in the water. They can't do that again. They can't do the memory stick duo. They can't do the not micro SD card that the Vita had that cost way too much money. This thing needs to come with enough storage to at least store a couple of games on the device, and then the extra add-on port, it needs to be micro SD. That's just the standard at this point, and they lost the handheld wars with the Vita because of that insanely overpriced memory card that they developed for it. I know that the only reason they did that, outside of making a little extra money on the side of the console, is because of how easy to hack the PSP was, but you shouldn't have, a hardware reason that costs me more money to fix your software mistakes that allow your console to be hacked. You should dedicate more money and more resources to making a less hackable console where it's like your onus and your money going towards it. Because putting problems that I never contributed to by pirating PSP or Vita games on me that cost me money in the long run, I don't think is consumer friendly, and it's honestly embarrassing that they ever let it get to that point. It just shows the level of hubris that we're seeing now, where they're charging $700 for the PS5 Pro. I need that Sony to die and wither in the corner and go back to PS3 generation Sony, where they actually supported their customers well. I also think this thing needs the exact same PSN access that the PS6 has. I need to answer messages. I need to be able to get trophies. It needs in-game recording. Every feature like that that the PS5 or PS6 will have needs to be on this device. It basically just needs to be a portable PS6, and that includes Discord. It needs to have built-in Discord to the OS like we have it now, because on the ROG Ally and the Steam Deck, you can just install Discord. It's the native app, but it's so technical, and like using an actual desktop app on a handheld sucks. So if you include Discord into the operating system as a way to chat with your friends across consoles, whether it's this PS6 handheld, a PS6 itself, the Xbox Next, the Xbox handheld, the Steam Deck, whatever, that's going to make people really feel nothing in terms of reservations about buying this thing, I think. And it also needs to be priced competitively. It needs to be significantly cheaper than the home console. And if they can nail all those checkboxes, I think this thing is primed to be the fabled handheld slam dunk that Sony has been desperately chasing since the initial PSP. I don't know if they're going to do it. You always got to bet on Sony making some stupid shoot themselves in the foot mistake, but they're primed to do it. They're like, the cards are all where they need to be. They just need to play them. But yeah, I'm really excited about this. I hope you are too. Let me know what you're thinking down in the comments below. Remember to subscribe and set your notifications to all if you haven't already. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.